I learned a new method that taught me how to work with people's trauma. It was unbelievable. 2 sessions done. And I can change so much about what you're experiencing. And I started to run towards the thing that I ran away from for so many years.
Becoming an impact-driven leader by being the leader we can be, by accepting that we have fears and insecurities and being willing to connect and be empathetic with people. As you've shared in the process of, hey, what can I do so my memories don't dictate how I interact with others?
Memories are fragile. Every time you call a memory forward, when you put it back, you're synthesizing new proteins. So the memory that goes back into storage is not the same memory that you recalled. So as you recall that memory, it's fragile. I can monkey with it. I can tinker with it, but I'm only tinkering with the images and the sensations.
Welcome to the Tyler Dickerhoof podcast with your host, me, Tyler Dickerhoof. On today's episode, I'm sitting down with my good friend, Laurel Wiers. Laurel is a licensed marriage and family therapist, has been practicing for over 24 years. She's created systems, a keynote, an entire, I would say, community of really helping people walk through their trauma, identify their trauma, but be the person they are made and destined to be. Laurel, so good to sit down with you.
Thank you so much, Tyler. I'm looking forward to our conversation today, really.
As always, I've gotten to know you through the Maxwell community. That's kind of been the realm in which we've interacted with a lot of different individuals. Let's go first as a start. For those that are listening in, it's like, okay, Laurel, you're a therapist. You help leaders. Like, what is it that you really do to help people?
So to help people specifically is I help them look at their behavior and see behaviors that no matter how much they try, they can't seem to think their way out of. So they've gone to cognitive behavioral therapy, they've done other things to try to work on them, and they can make a little bit of progress, but when the heat really gets turned up, they tend to go back to those behaviors that they don't want to do. Typically when that happens, that means that that behavior, it's connected to something in your life, whether it's a core memory or a critical moment. So I help them tie those together and make that connection. And then the really cool part comes in. I can change the way that the brain stores those images and sensations. And when you do that, you can remove the triggers. And when you remove the triggers, your nervous system calms down. And then you have choice when you hit that situation that formerly you behaved in a way that you were less than proud of.
Man, we are digging in. We're not even 2 minutes into this, but all of a sudden, wow. And, part of it is, we can go on a couple different avenues here, but how did you realize this is what I'm meant to do to serve people?
Well, I didn't initially, so that's part of it. I knew I wasn't even going to be a therapist initially, so that's a whole nother story. But it took me 17 years to actually decide that I would even try my hand at trauma, because what I knew to be true was that talk therapy does not fix trauma. And if I can't make a change in your experience, then I'm going to send you to people that I think can do that. But then about 10 years ago, I learned a new method that taught me how to work with people's trauma. And even though I was leery initially, I started using it and it was unbelievable. I mean, I could see change within 1 session, 2 sessions done. So this rocked my world of talk therapy. That was months, sometimes years working through things. And once I started to do it, my passion for it was just unbelievable, because I thought whenever I would see people with trauma, sit with me for an hour and a half, and I can change so much about what you're experiencing. And I started to run towards the thing that I ran away from for so many years. So then I just have loved doing it. And then that moved out of clinical into now working privately with people.
Okay, so I'm going to make those listening just a little bit of a tease. We haven't even really got in the conversation. We'll get into that unlocking method. But this is what I think is amazing, is that you have so much excitement and confidence that you can help people transform in just like a small bit. Whereas we've been led to believe it's like, oh, you're either going to have to live with this for the rest of your life. And, you mentioned something just a bit ago is triggers, right? We've kind of in this world, especially I have teenage kids, you have kids roughly the same age, a little bit older. And we've talked, so much of kids is like we've tried to whitewash society and eliminate triggers instead of saying, hey, why don't we help you deal with those triggers? Just take that and run with that a little bit.
Ugh. That is just you're speaking my language because it drives me crazy. This idea that we should look away from something, we should try to numb something, and that we shouldn't dig into it. Because the thing with triggers is your body is created to tell you where to do the work. So a trigger is always highlighting some space in your mind, in your memory, in your body that is not yet integrated, that we haven't neutralized, or that we haven't metabolized. And so when you're triggered, we should do the opposite, which is sit with that, explore that, get curious about that, and say, okay, what is that alerting me to that I have unfinished business with?
Would it be fair to say triggers are clues?
Oh, they're signals. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
There's there's a saying in business is success leaves clues, right? And I think kind of this similar idea that triggers are leading us clues to say, doesn't mean that it wasn't real. Doesn't mean something didn't happen. Doesn't mean there's not a psychological and a physiological reason to respond. But the response, what I've kind of gathered from you so far is like, oh, you're in control, as opposed to being some other force in control.
Mm. Yeah, and that's where it gets interesting because your nervous system is reacting, and that's the part that feels out of control, right? The minute you have a trigger, you've gone offline with prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's rational, and you've gone into amygdala land. And that's the part that makes people think they can't get control over it. But if you can say no, sit with that feeling, let your amygdala do its thing, find out where that memory set is, then you can work through it in a way that makes sense. You can consciously approach it and change things.
There's an element of, and just kind of either through my own conversations and work and, kind of processing, working through things, I think quite often as I reflect on that, the moment we take agency, the process of just talking out no longer has value. But it's the lack of agency, meaning, oh, I have to keep talking about this because I feel like either a victim to it or, there's even like oh, this happened to me and I just have to accept that it happened to me instead of, really taking agency and saying, all right, what can I do to change my responses? How can I say, yeah, that may have happened to me, but it doesn't define me? Is that a part of the method that you work with?
So the part of the method I work with, it's actually not a rational process at all. It's going into a state that we are going to change literally how your body and brain store the memory. Because the part that you're talking about is what works for some people. I'm not saying that it doesn't, right? So talk therapy, you can go in and you can say, this is something that happened to me, but I'm no longer in that space. For some people that works. They can say this was a past experience. Yes, I'm triggered in the present. They can recognize we're in that present moment of, okay, this is not happening right now. Some people, they can do that. That's enough. They can move on. Some people, yes, time does minimize the intensity or the level of distress. And so they'll tell you 10 years later, yep, it's not a thing for me anymore. I've worked through it. But then you have the people that neither of those works. And no matter how much you try to talk yourself through it or talk about it, it is not going to change it because it's up here and it's in here. And until we can take, it's called a ready state memory, until we can take that memory and manually override it, and there's a process I take people through to do that, you're not going to get over it. It is going to keep talking to you because it's stuck in a way. And so that's what I like to tell people. The trigger is telling you this memory set is stuck and we have to metabolize it before it stops talking to you. And you can't talk yourself through that piece because you're not, again, in prefrontal cortex when that's happening.
One thing that I makes me think of as you share that is twofold. We're in such a new world with Maha and everything else. Make, America healthy again. This idea of instead of going to sick care, that just wants to perpetuate your care in order to justify a business model, that we actually should be looking for solutions because those solutions actually create us to either serve more people or be more productive. There's a real virtue of understanding that makes me think not many people want to employ this method that you're talking about, because man, if I can have a recurring customer that's going to be coming back every single week or multiple times a week for years, dude, that pays a lot of money as opposed to somebody, hey, 1-2 sessions, that's all we need.
You got it, Tyler. Oh my goodness. That is such the truth. And I run into it all the time. And people are like, well, how come no one's heard of this? And I'm like, well, they're not really, advertising and shouting it from the rooftops, because clearly if I can get you off of your medications by integrating these experiences early in your life, you're right. We get rid of big pharma, in a sense, the money for that. So yeah, it definitely goes against that. But I love this MAHA movement, because we're saying, let's look at alternatives that maybe before were considered wacky woo, or as we know, just like ketamine and all these other treatments, psilocybin, they've been suppressed for other reasons. And so I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in this field now that maybe we can have a little bit more freedom.
I think, take a side from there. I spoke to a friend last week, and we were talking more on the agricultural side of things, but I think it fits in here both. With the comment that you just said is it's really an opportunity to rethink everything. If I go back and think of the Adam Grant book, which is kind of rethink. Instead of doing what we've always done, let's rethink that. I believe that's kind of a tie-in to exactly what you do with people. It's kind of taking this process to say, hey, let's rethink and almost, create a new memory. So explain a little bit more about this method you use, what it's about, how you got introduced, all those things.
So I use actually 3 methods. I've at this point created my own method, which is called MINT, and it stands for Memory Integration and Neutralization Technique. And the way that I developed that was that I started to use just one model, and then no model in and of itself is complete. So then I would define the holes in that and apply a second model to get a more holistic treatment approach. And then from there, I added a third one. And when I weave all 3 of those together in what I call our resolution sessions with my clients, it to me feels like the most complete, because each complements the other in what we do. So when we do that, what we're doing is we're understanding, first of all, brain science, which is that memories are fragile. Every time you call a memory forward, when you put it back, you're synthesizing new proteins. So the memory that goes back into storage is not the same memory that you recalled. So as you recall that memory, it's fragile. I can monkey with it. I can tinker with it, but I'm only tinkering with the images and the sensations. So it's different than hypnosis. Hypnosis is going to it's a process you're not actively taking part in and don't remember after. It's like a lucid dream. You are aware every step of the way what we're doing. You're actively, involuntarily choosing what images that you want to replace and the storyline that you want to replace that horrible episode with. So by the time I get done using either tapping or moving people's eyes, something to create bilateral stimulation while we're recalling the memory and calming their nervous system, we process that memory and then we change the association to it. By the end of the session, you can tell me every detail of what happened, but you don't see it and you don't feel it anymore. And that is where the transformation is. It's not the story that triggers people. It's the images and the sensations from the story that are the bothersome part. That's what your nervous system is reacting to. That's what it needs to integrate.
Okay, so let me just do a little bit of breaking it down, simplifying it. There's a piece there that I understood that really they are. All right, I'm going to try to say this in a way, correct me, kind of redefine it, but it's really the sights, the sounds that drive us towards the triggers, not the actual detailed events. So if we start to adjust the sight or the sound, like the Pavlov's dog bell, right? If we adjust that to whatever the trigger is, then all of a sudden we can see the entire episode play out and yeah, that really doesn't do much for me. Is that fair? Is that a way to kind of describe it?
Yeah, so it's actually a very natural process. So your brain, it works with something that is called adaptive information processing. So every night when we go to bed, your brain is doing this with all the things that have happened already during the day.
As you were like, we replay all these memories, and when we lay down in bed at night, I'm like, yeah, that's what happens. You take melatonin to just shut your world off so you don't have to have that, or you'll just lay in bed all night long of rethinking all the different steps. Maybe that's just me. My photographic memory going.
No.
Okay.
A lot of people have that for sure. But when you're sleeping is when the magic happens. So when you're sleeping, during your REM sleep, that is when your brain is integrating the memories during the day. So it's a very natural process. But when you have something that's intense, your brain doesn't do what it does normally at night. So it's not even a conscious process. It's just that it's stuck there and it didn't get to metabolize or integrate while you were sleeping that night. It's in a sense too big. So when you come to therapy with me or I work with you, we are manually doing what the brain naturally does, but it needs a little bit of help. So you're not sitting there and actually consciously saying, I'm looking at this and it doesn't bother me anymore. I'm going to choose to look at this. Because it's a natural process to metabolize the memory, when I process that memory with you through different things that I do, your brain then metabolizes it. It then naturally does what it was supposed to do when you were sleeping at night. So then when I use bilateral stimulation, just like REM sleep and your eyes are moving back and forth, you are actually processing out all of the negative feels that went with it. And then once that's processed out, sometimes when you even just try to look at that memory again before you even get to the positive associations, you can't see it anymore. So I will bring my clients through this process and we'll get to like, say the first 15 minutes of our session and we'll process out, they'll have looked at it, we've calmed the body, it's integrated it in a sense. And I'll say, okay, go back and look at it again. And they're like, I can't see it. I can't find it. Just like these things that happened today during the day. When we go to sleep tonight, we're going to wake up tomorrow and we're not going to be able to remember a couple things that happened during the day. But then at that point, it's sometimes not just enough to calm the system, but we want to get rid of that stuck image that is the trigger for somebody. So let's say they can't see most of the memory, but they can still see that face, or they can see that person jump out before they hit them with the car. That stays stuck. So then I have to bring them through another process where we now associate a positive image and get rid of that. And in a sense, it kind of takes over. So your brain hits that picture rather than the original picture. And by the time you've done both of those things, the person's system is completely chilled out about what's happened.
What makes me, I don't want to say understand what you're saying, but you and I could go, leave this conversation, right? And there will be a few moments that just really stick out for us, right? Unless we stop and just really process it all. And, or what I love to do sometimes is, because sometimes there's a lag in between recording and posting a podcast. I'll go back and watch them. Like, I didn't even remember I said that. I didn't remember the guest said that. So that understanding gives me the proximity to say, oh, okay, why did I have more vivid memories of one instance rather than another? And I have to gather it's some type of association that makes those memories more vivid. And so from that understanding of the difference in memories makes me believe that what you're saying is entirely plausible. It's just, can we override the system allowing it instead of allowing it to kind of go on its own?
Right. Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because that's a really cool thing that happens with people when they process trauma. So they will look at the memory the way that they thought they remembered it. And then once we've calmed the nervous system down and we've, in a sense, cleared it, they go back and watch it and they see things they never saw before. They see details and they feel feelings that they never felt the first time. So for example, someone will say, wait a minute, I actually wasn't alone after that accident. Or hold on, I actually can see my brother in the room when that happened. So it's really interesting how based on the emotional charge that's going on, it's like there's static and you can't see a memory for what it is. But then once you process through things, then you can actually see parts of it that you never saw before, which is amazing when people are processing earlier childhood things. They will think that for sure this is how they remember something. And then once you clear it, they're like, oh my gosh, that wasn't the situation at all. I can see all the good times in my life. I can see all the times that my family had these positive moments. So it's really interesting what the brain does when you add emotion to it and when you take it away.
So here's where I want to, kind of transition or say this is like, what impact does this have in the real world? And I say real world, it's all real. Like, let's not get confused with ourselves. But when I say the real world, our relationships, whether that's work, whether that's personal, whether it's tertiary, whatever it may be, what impact does it have there for people?
Oh, huge. I'll just share an example of what I posted today. So I had a man come in my office a couple weeks ago and shared with me how he has these extra reactions, right? And extra is how you can describe your reactions when they're not appropriate to the current situation. And
All right.
all of us, right, in relationships
Extra reactions.
have,
I'll remember
yes.
that. The next time my wife, Kelly, says something, I'll just say, I'm sorry, that was my extra reaction.
Yes, there you go. And so when we have these extra responses to things, that's typically indicating, right, that there's a little bit more going on. So for him, if he would get a bill in the mail that he wasn't expecting, he would have an extra response, more anger, more upset, just completely, not reacting in an appropriate way with his language and his behavior. Or if somebody surprised him. So recently, what brought him to me is his wife had played a trick on him. She had surprised him and he flipped. He went in the kids' playroom, he broke the desk, and he's like, I'm here to see you because I think I have an anger problem. Totally.
Lost it all.
Lost it. And
And it was
so
pretty, I'm guessing this surprise was pretty benign. It wasn't like, hey, I'm pregnant with some other dude's baby.
No.
Okay. All right.
No.
I want to give some context here. All right.
Yes, totally normal. Again, an extra reaction to a normal thing. So I sat there with him and said, okay, so you're reacting, my guess is, to something else that's happened in your life. So I would say to him, let's follow that thread. Think about the other day when your wife surprised you. Feel it in your body. He felt it. I said, okay, now close your eyes. Let's go back. Where does that take you to? And he said, when my dad died. He said, 10 years ago, my dad passed away unexpectedly. I had no idea. He wasn't sick, nothing. And that was the unexpected moment that now feels exactly the same as when you get the unexpected bill or the unexpected surprise. We processed the whole thing out, gone. He texted me the other day and he was like, that has been living in me for 10 years. I had no idea. And I have completely different responses to what's going on now. So that's a small example, but you can imagine, right? It's your coworkers. Why does Jane bother you when she talks in a certain tone, but it's not when Bob says the same thing in a completely different tone? I'll look at that and be like, oh, there's someone in your life that person is reminding you to. There's some memory, some moment, some something, and that's creating a response that is not an adaptive response to the current situation that you're facing.
I got to go a lot of different ways, and I don't necessarily want to make this deeper, but what I, do relate to that is there's someone that responds to me sometimes when I'll just say something pretty benign. It's like, don't tell me what to do. And like, about it, not the case. But yet it's been well established that they have had that happen in their life a lot. And so to me, it relates a lot. It relates to what you're saying, because unless we understand, and because there's twofold, like once he understood, oh, I'm responding to this because of that moment, is there again a rational, like, yeah, I can't, but it's also reassociating the response to the memory. Is that part of it?
So the part of it is you're right. So obviously that person has some episodes in their past where they felt controlled and they have a negative response to it. It doesn't have to be trauma, it's just a response. But that's where people get stuck, and that's when I have to work with them, is that one person can say, oh, that's old stuff. I don't need to react to it. I can be okay. But in that situation, that person's aware of it, but try as they might, they cannot stop having that reaction. And even if they don't verbally respond to it, their nervous system is still jacked up. So they're not responding, but it's sucking energy out of you that's unnecessary, and it's hurting that relationship. And that's where you have to say, now we need to integrate process, which is not a cognitive process, right? It's the process that I bring you through when I do the therapies. That is the only way we're going to integrate that memory. We've got to change how your brain is storing it, because otherwise you are not going to be able to think your way through that.
The biggest communities that have, I don't want to say endured some of the most dramatic traumas, right? First responders, we have military personnel, we have, people in social services. Quite often, a lot of times they see just horrendous things. Like, how applicable is this process to them? Because maybe it's not a personal, but it's something I've observed social.
I work with them all the time. So I actually have a really close relationship with the police station in my community, and they send 2 types of people to me. They send me their first responders who have been tripped up by 1, 2, 3, multiple things, and somebody that maybe just found their partner dead. They will send me within 24 hours. Like, let's get this person doesn't get stuck with that image because they've seen how this can work. So it works exactly the same, which is your brain now, right, has this thing hanging out in the front. So I'll often have police come to me and they have, like, let's say 3 episodes. They'll be like, Laurel, when I go to sleep at night or throughout the day, I keep seeing this, this, and this. And it could be over a span of 10 years, 5 years, 2 weeks, whatever it is. And they're like, I just don't want to see it anymore. But again, it's an unintegrated memory. It's called ready state. It's sitting there and it's saying there's work to be done here. So I bring them through the same process. And what their brain does is we are now metabolizing it. We are now integrating it. And by the time they get to the end of my session, they can no longer see that image of that child anymore or of that horrific accident that they saw. And the relief that it brings is unbelievable. And it's all in 60 to 90 minutes. And what's super cool, Tyler, is that lots of times when you're triggered with a trauma, if you have what my men that come in, let's say they have 3 things. I can process out the first and the second one. I never have to get rid of the third one sometimes because trauma, it weaves itself together in this funny way that once I pulled 1 and 2, the third one lived within them. It was just a re-traumatization of some of the things they experienced with 1 and 2. So we'll get done with that and I'll say, okay, now let's go into our session to do the third one. And they're like, it's gone. Don't even see it anymore. It fell. So it's super powerful, but I work with first responders all the time, especially the new guys, the younger guys who start out and they've seen that first accident, like this is their life. They've been looking forward to this job, so excited about it. And they go to that first call that someone died. And right, then you start to have these internal messages. I'm not capable. It's my fault, right? A lot of them, they're done. They're like, this is not the job for me. If I can get a hold of them quick on, we can process that memory. And then they lose all of that self-doubt, right? That lie that wanted to start burying itself in them, gone, and they can go back, drive by the site of the accident and feel nothing. But we had to integrate the memory because it was too big for their brain to do it on its own. So it's such powerful work.
When you share this with people, how much is there of like, well, you've just desensitized them. You've made them numb.
I actually don't get that a lot because I think a lot of people aren't aware of even the role that desensitization plays. So desensitization is only one of the 4 parts I do. So if you were somewhat aware of, let's say, exposure therapy, which that's all exposure therapy is, it is not integrating a darn thing. It is just desensitizing you. You present to something enough a stimulus, you're going to have a response, you're going to calm down. This is so much more than desensitization because some people can be desensitized, but 10 years later, bam, it comes back and it takes over on you because it was just desensitized, but you didn't integrate it. So you could get through that. But if you see something that's similar to the thing you desensitized to, there you go, all over again. It's as if you have experienced that first trauma all over.
What about this? And one of my wrote down this comment. You were talking earlier about the process that I would say, hard drive memories during sleep, right? We cache them away. We make all these memories hard drive. How much do substances, alcohol, even sleeping pills, any of those substances absolutely jack with that process and make it either incomplete or doesn't happen or happens in a different fashion?
So I wouldn't be able to speak to the science of that, but what I can speak to is the experience.
Okay,
My
even
people
better.
that abuse any or all 3 of those still have the memory that needs to be integrated. So it doesn't. It's just numbing you, right? And what's so fascinating, Tyler, is when I work with people, they cannot be on any substances or my process doesn't work. Because when you are numbed, the brain will not release and feel. And I need your nervous system to be right in that space that's triggered to, in a sense, I'm pulling that out of you. So I've had people come in and they've been high and didn't tell me. And I'll start to go through my process and I can tell. because it's not doing what it's supposed to. And I'll be like, did you smoke today? Because I'll know that that's their history to numb. And they'll be like, yes. And I'm like, get out of here. Come back tomorrow. Like, you cannot do that because that's the hard part, right? They're so fearful of feeling that way again, that even though they know that they're coming in to do a therapy with me to make it stop bothering them, it's too scary to do it straight. But it will not work if you are on chemicals. So that right there says that that chemical process messes with the way that we store the memory and the way that we process it.
So on the flip side of that, what about, this process, or, so often people will choose, fall into substance abuse as a way to cope with their memories. So if we're talking about the memories first and foremost, that's one thing. But what about the effect of the substance abuse, whatever that may be? And sometimes the substance abuse isn't even a substance, it's a physical abuse, right? It could be all the other different factors. It's someone who overtrained, it's some, eating disorders, any of those things that are attached to a response to memory. Like, explain to me the process difference or the same there.
So when you have those things right, those are almost what I would call secondary. So if someone came in to see me and they had an eating disorder, which I work with often, I'm not going to actually address the eating disorder. I'm going to address the memory sets that are feeding that behavior first. Because if I do that, I'm just kind of band-aiding in a sense. So just like with the alcohol use, I'm not even going to go there. I'm going to wait and say, okay, what is it that we're avoiding? What is it that we're trying to numb in order to do that? So any of those coping skills that are happening, I'm always getting at, well, what is it covering up? Because the minute we can heal that, then we're still going to have the addiction to deal with, but you don't have to fight as hard. So let me give an example. A lot of times people that are raped or have had sexual abuse, they are overeaters because their body is telling them, I want to no longer be looked at and be attractive again. So try as they might, they'll come in my office and say, I've dieted, I've done, the whole 9 yards for years. None of it's worked, Laurel. Well, of course it hasn't, because you're fighting your subconscious. Your subconscious will not let you look attractive again, because that means danger, danger, harm. So I'll say to them, what we're going to do is process that abuse, but you're still going to need therapy after to deal with the behaviors that you have built in your life to cope. But the difference is going to be this. Now, this time when you go on that diet, you're not fighting yourself, you're not fighting your subconscious, and you're going to have an easier time carrying out that behavior modification to now we can start to lay down some healthier habits without that huge resistance behind it, because we're not threatening your body anymore with losing weight.
What about body dysmorphia?
Oh, that's a toughie. That one, it is
Why?
it's like,
You know me enough to know that I'm gonna you to give me the real pretty answers. Like, no, I want to know more. Like, come on, Laurel, give me the scoop.
I wish I knew, because there's a couple things with that. So body dysmorphia is like the fear of puking. So there's like I know it.
That's a strange correlation.
Okay, so let me explain. Meaning that there's certain things that someone can come in my office and I'm like, oh, easy, we can integrate that, no problem. You start to come in with body dysmorphia or puke phobia, and I'm like, shoot, this is going to be hard, because it's going to go one of two ways. It's either going to be easy peasy simple because it's a surface level issue and I can tie it back to a memory that's pretty easy to process, or it's way more complex and your body's working so stinking hard to hide that it's a lot harder to chase it, find it, and clear it within a couple sessions. So with body dysmorphia, it all depends on where it started. So I would look into that, like, where did this start, right? What happened? But there's just, I can't explain, like with the vomiting, I don't know what it is. It's just something about when those manifest, they're a little more sticky wickets is my way of describing them. They're just a little bit more resistant. Just like when I was doing talk therapy all the time, you give me anxiety and depression, infidelity, no problem. You give me an eating disorder and I'm like, oh, we're going to be at this a long time, because it's just they're just harder. And I'm sure there's someone else that could have a way better answer as to why. All I know is that I'm dealing with resistance when I'm dealing with them, because they're just wired in you differently.
Which is interesting himself. That makes me want to dig deeper, right? I mean, there's something there. There's a reason why. And so that's, again, my curiosity, the curiousness that I go about life makes me wonder more. But also it's why I think those things can be so damaging, because they are so much more hardwired.
Oh, seriously. I had a girl that I worked with recently in this last year, and I had worked with her, Tyler, for like 3 years on and off with body dysmorphic disorder. And no matter what we did, talk therapy, behavior mod, you name it, like, nothing worked. However, this year, when she allowed me to start doing this different type of work with her, we actually cleared it. But you know what it was tied to? It was when she was in middle school, she just had major insecurities and she was mocked and made fun of and never felt like she was enough. And once we were able to, and it wasn't even using some of the therapies that I use that just kind of rewrite the memory and clear it. It was so much deeper than that. We had to go to the core, and she had to literally go in and rescue that little girl, go back to that moment in middle school, see her and feel what that felt like to be in that space where she was not enough and really feel it. And again, back to the part I started with today, sit with that emotion long enough to let it release from your body. Because if we don't sit with emotions and acknowledge and honor them, they keep showing up. And the hardest part is when I say to my clients, stay in that space with me. And sometimes it's a minute, it's 2 minutes, but feel that. Oh, it's painful, Tyler. You know, your whole body feels it. It's awful. It's yuck. It's heavy. It's dark. But once you see it and acknowledge and honor it, it's like it goes, thank you. So once we did that work and she could really see, it's like see me, right? See herself in that. Then I said, let's go rescue her. And she metaphorically went in and grabbed that little girl and took her back with her and made her safe. And then it was so interesting. About 8 weeks later, we talked and she said, you know what? I am not having any of those issues when I look in the mirror anymore. And she said it was ever since that session that day.
You've alluded to this, man, I think back even myself. How many of us are so implanted with a personality adjusting trigger, memory, whatever it may be, that happens during those quote unquote middle school years?
Oh, so many. So I find 2 spots, 6 through 8, big. Many of my people, when I say, what age were you? I can almost predict it's going to be 6 to 8 or it's middle school, right? It's these formative years. There's things that go on developmentally during that time that they're biggies. But middle school is so huge with identity. And this is the thing people say, like, oh, my middle school boyfriend, cheated on me. It can't be that important, Laurel. It was middle school. And I'm like, no, the fact that you just told me that that's where your brain went when I said, when did you feel betrayal for the first time in your life, tells me that that's inception, right? That's the moment that your body learned. If you give your heart away, it's going to get stomped on. And now you're carrying that with you. And we can reprocess that memory, integrate it, done. And then that triggering calms down. So often it's that bullying, right? There are so many, it's that vulnerability, it's identity.
Is it that the first memory, because you just mentioned like the first betrayal, the first whatever, the first getting picked on, the first time you're told you're not pretty enough, you're not athletic enough, you're not strong enough, you're not smart, like whatever, that first, is that more hardwired sometimes into our response? And to me, there's a very evolutionary concept to that. You want it to be first so you don't hit the second one and absolutely, you stepped a little too close to the edge the first time, the second time you went over the edge, like you don't survive.
Exactly. We'll remember that one.
Is there that element of it, or is there more to it?
So I find both. So often I'll say to people, I want your first or your worst. So sometimes our first is not the worst. And that's what makes the distinction. So someone today I was on the phone with, and they were giving me 3 of their scenes, but the worst one was not the first one. So I said, that's the one we're going to pull. And so when I do the resolution around it, I will always check back to the first one just because I want to be complete and make sure that there's nothing that's held in that. But it's first or worst, typically, like you said, right? It's preparing us. Your body's saying, oh, we never want to experience that again, right? Self-preservation. So it's reminding you all the time, don't do that again.
Part of the world that we have engaged in, interacted in, is this in the world of leadership. We've touched a little bit about, working with, people in leadership roles. And I one of the things that I'd love to step back here and kind of understand is, you know what? The responses and the drivers and the interactions that we have with people around us, we need to be very cautious and not take for surface level.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear that and understand what that means, how do we then take what you've shared through, the 30 plus minutes that we've been talking about and interact with people differently?
That is such a good question. And I think it goes back to, right, we just don't know. Always assuming that we have no idea what that person just walked through, what they have walked through. And that is such an intentional mindset that is not human, right? Because we're reacting so often.
Why do you say it's not human?
Because it's more likely for us to be defensive with self-preservation and I think to assume something because that protects us rather than to come from the perspective of, I'm not going to worry about how that felt about me. Right? And I'm gonna assume that that person really didn't mean that, and they're having a hard time. That's just if you talk to 10 people, they'll be like, "Yeah, that is not my first response typically." When somebody cuts me off on the road, I'm not thinking, "They just had a really hard day today at the office. I need to give them some patience." It's usually, right, it's just that defensiveness in us, I think, that's trying to protect ourselves, and when we feel harm or brushed off or rushed or ignored or not paid attention to, we're just very self-absorbed by nature, and we have to work hard not to be that way.
I think of an instance that I've spoken, with people about. There's people that either are very trusting or they're people that are very distrusting, meaning everyone has their best intention. They're not trying to manipulate. The other one's like, they are trying to manipulate. This is what they're going and make that reasonable. And I would say most cases it's somewhere in between or not anywhere close to the extreme of being that manipulative. I think we found in society people aren't as manipulative as we think. There are people that are, but it's not the overall trend of people. Is that a manifestation of memories or is that a different process, do you think?
I think it's a couple things. One, what was modeled for you as a child? What did you see, right? If your parents are distrusting, skeptical people, well, there's pretty good chance that you're going to follow that way as well. So it's that whole nature versus nurture concept. It just goes back to that, I think. And what are the negative life events that you've experienced and how much did they impact your ability to trust? And what corrective influences did you have in your life that if you did experience a huge mistrust, were you supported and able to work through it in such a way that it didn't become this indelible mark upon your personality?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, those were, kind of two thoughts blended together, but I want to go back to this idea of you never know what people are going through.
Mhm.
And I think there's very much as I interact with people, as I share my journey, as I share kind of this idea of, becoming an impact-driven leader by being the leader we can be, by accepting that we have fears and insecurities and being willing to connect and be empathetic with people. I look at that and, as you've shared in the process of, hey, what can I do so my memories don't dictate how I, interact with others. And I think that's the biggest piece that I pull away from what you've shared and kind of this process. Like, hey, if my interactions are creating such a, say carnage, to use word that I use in regards to my intensity, which was a response to a traumatic event. Whenever there's a difficult traumatic, I go intense, right? That's what I do. And when I think about, as you've discussed in our opportunity here, I think there's almost as much a point as like, hey, I need to accept and be authentically vulnerable. This is what's happening.
Mhm. Mhm.
Is that a part of the process you think kind of either impacting our relationships or affecting them, especially in a workplace or in our personal level?
I think you're right. It's that part of one, we want to extend grace to ourselves and say, okay, we're always a work in progress. I see something's happening with me. I probably need to take some time and sit with that. And the word you used even, it doesn't mean it's trauma. Lots of these responses that we have, they're the ones that fly under the radar because they are not trauma. They are the ones that we overlook, but they were somehow wired in us in such a way. And so to be able to say, okay, but I need to listen to this signal. Now that I see that I'm having a response, my responsibility is to sit with that and say, what is that bringing up in me? And what do I need to do so that I can perform better so that I'm not constantly tripping over this certain behavior set?
Sometimes and share the story about the experience I had as a 14-year-old. People are like, oh, I never had to deal with something that dramatic, or, I haven't had to deal with what you have. It's like, it doesn't matter. We all have situations and memories and instances that affect our memories, our reactions, our triggers, and how that brings us into interaction with others. And so when I think about that for me, and I think about yourself, hey, being so driven to say, man, I want to bring this to people. What was maybe a process that you had personally? It's like, wow, I didn't realize, and this is how it's actually helped me serve people in a better way.
Well, I can speak to what I didn't realize was harming me and that I had to work through. I feel like that's my lens quite
Yeah,
often.
it's
I'll
great.
be like, Okay, what is this about? Why am I freaking out about this? And what is it that's going on?" It almost to
Yeah.
the point that it becomes very normative for me at this point. But even recently, just speaking, right? So I'm giving a keynote in a couple weeks, and I've spoken to groups before, but I speak at a very academic level. So I can give you CEUs, I can speak to social workers, I can speak to like that whole thing. I'm teaching you, I'm training you, I'm good with that. But now when you stick me up in front of a room of my peers and I'm not in that expert role, like yes and no, it's because I'm talking to you, but I was starting to have all sorts of triggerings, Tyler, and like just paralysis, analysis paralysis, being very stuck. And all of a sudden my husband was like, "What is this about?" He said, "Honey, I hear you talk all the time." He said, "You know your stuff. Like, what is happening?" And I had to sit there and be like, "Oh, this is one of those things like my clients. I got to figure this out." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I know what it is." Graduate school 25 years ago. I was asked to give a presentation at a national conference, and I'd never done a poster presentation before. And my advisor was between two universities, so she didn't give me much oversight. The morning of the presentation, I pulled out my poster presentation, I showed it to her, and the look on her face, Tyler, told me something was wrong. And come to find out, a poster presentation is not supposed to have clip art and caricatures and be entertaining as a poster. It is supposed to be research, black and white, put on a board. Well, mine was the clip art cartoon, entertaining version. And so we were stuck in this moment that she said, "Well, we can pull and let down the committee, or we're going to go out there and suck it up." And it was the most grueling 3 hours sitting there and having people walk by me and either not pay attention because it was laughable what I had presented, or give me a pity compliment. And so as I'm preparing to go in front of this room, I was like, yep, that's the thing. It's do not go into a room again where you think you know what you're doing and people are going to show you that you don't. And so having to process that has prepared me to now go into the room and to do that. But it was, yeah, that's the process I go through.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm excited you had that revelation, because I know that this is my belief, is that not only as you just connected through that better for the people that are going through, but it's also, I think, a great reminder for so many people is that when we're seeking validation and worth, and you didn't do it intentionally, right? And it's also understanding that sometimes when we have those mistakes or those instances, or people that work for us do something unintentionally, our reaction can drive their future response more than we realize. And I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of that as a dad, right? I'm guilty of that as a husband. I'm guilty of that as a podcast host, right? Because I'm guilty of not necessarily always thinking about it, but your suggestion just reminds me, hey, you know what? Remember how we show up in regards to how we respond to things, because that actually drives more than anything else.
Oh, and as parents, especially as you say that, right? I think that's almost like the occupational hazard I have with my kids. I'm constantly like, okay, think about your reaction. How are you going to show up? Because this is going to be the thing. They're going to be on someone's couch in 20 years if you don't get it right, Laurel. Like it's, yes.
Yeah.
But in every arena, right? I think about that in therapy. I think about that when I run into people. I think about that. I had a woman spill coffee on me at the Maxwell event that we were at a couple months ago. And in that moment, I had white pants on, Tyler. And I was going to be going in that day to the Maxwell event. And I was like, okay, you have a couple choices here, Laurel, on how you respond to this. And to be able to think, heal, not harm. And to just love on her in that moment and be like, it's okay. Like, don't stress about it. Right. When the insides are going, oh my gosh.
I'm going to look like that person who just doesn't know how to get their clothes clean or whatever. You make up all the stories, right? All the stories. I don't need to go there, like all the stories.
Yes.
And then you stop and you remember, yeah, no, it's okay.
Exactly. But that's what I think the difference is between, and I'm not saying this about me, but people in general. When we pay attention to the things that we overreact to and we do our work, it gives us the ability to be calm enough to take those couple seconds to think before we respond. When people don't do their work, they're triggering and reacting to things all the time. So they're not able to take that just little moment to just think, how do I want to show up right now? And so I think that if we all understand everyone's in process, but if we can all be in process, we're all just going to show up better.
Well, and I think it's the opportunity to give each other grace.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's an element where I kind of have this idea when it's talking about how our insecurities manifest. It's like, excuse me, my insecurity's showing.
Yeah.
And I think the ability to do that diffuses others. But, you know, as you mentioned, and kind of some of the things you've talked about is everyone knows that your memory is driving a reaction. Everyone knows it. Everyone, like when I say something to my wife and she responds in a way when I, you know, at work, whenever we have that, we know, okay, there's something there. None of us know what it is. And I think what I hear from you, sometimes the greatest opportunity to kind of either reestablish, rebuild, enhance relationships is saying, I got triggered when you surprised me. I'm working through it. Just, I understand it. It's not right. Give me some grace. It doesn't mean what I did was right. Okay. I need to continue to process through it. I think just by getting to that step, man, we enhance connections and we become better leaders. We become better spouses. We become better parents just because we take ownership
Oh, absolutely.
rather than diffuse.
Well, yeah, because in that we do this very important thing that relationships need, which is if you tell me that you see that you've harmed me with your behavior, I don't have to keep reminding you of it. And when we have that, right, in
No,
relationship,
that's fair.
I
Right.
can trust you because there becomes that part of if you keep doing that to me and I don't acknowledge it, now I have to let you know that you keep doing that to me. And that becomes conflictual right within itself in the relationship and creates a whole nother thing. And then we're fighting about something that's not the real thing that started in the first place. But if I tell you, it takes all of the air out of it. And it says, no, I see, I'm going to work on it. And that person goes, I'm actually safe because they see what they're doing and I can trust that they're aware of it. And it completely changes that dynamic.
Well, it's when you take ownership, the other person feels seen
Yep.
and heard and understood.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's connection.
Yep.
That's empathy at play. In going back to the very beginning is if we whitewash triggers, we never get to connection.
Right. Absolutely.
Look at that full circle.
Good job.
Laura, where can people find more about your work, your process, anything to kind of learn a little bit more about either working with you or just understanding better about how the process they can help unlock, you know, for themselves?
Sure. So they can go to my website, laurelwiers.com. It's actually, I have one up right now, but I have a new one coming up in 2 weeks. And that one will speak an awful lot about the work that I do, how I work, and the way that I work with people. But until then, they can also follow me on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Laurel Wiers. I have all sorts of posts about what's going on. But I do consultations for people. You can fill out a form on my website and in 20 minutes, just kind of chat about what you need and what's going on. And if what I do is something that could be helpful for you.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for this opportunity to chat with you. Thank you to everyone watching on YouTube. Remember to hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to get notified whenever we drop new content, whether it's Newswire or podcasts. For those of you listening, wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's Apple, iTunes, podcasts, Spotify, wherever that may be, if you could do this, if you could rate and review this episode, that will help others find more information and more impactful leaders like Laurel. So thank you for being here today. And until next time, choose to lead with impact.